Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series on the Acts of Moses. And last time for Pentecost, Shavuot, we looked at how Moses went up on the mount when he was actually called up on the day of Pentecost. And and that's what Pentecost was commemorating in association with them leaving Egypt and getting their instructions. Now, we also talked about how how this fire from heaven came down on the mount at the time of Pentecost. So also it came down upon the disciples, and how everything you see in Acts 2 particularly is connected to Shavuot or Pentecost. And and we explained that in detail and showed it. And ended with a little bit of warning about revival, in that revival has a purpose to refresh you, prepare you to do the work God's called you to. But people, like, similar to the weekly Sabbath or Shemitah, the year of release. But the problem is people want the refreshment to continue well beyond the time it should, and forget about the purpose for it. And when that occurs, there's two dangers. One, the refreshment has to come from the Lord. If people just try to fake it and keep making it, they'll just try to be like, well, we can play the same songs, do all that sort of stuff. But they can do that stuff, but they can't make the presence of the Lord be there and the Holy Spirit be moving the way the Holy Spirit was. And it didn't do it because of whatever song they played or whatever in the first place. And that's one danger. And they're not fulfilling the Great Commission. They're just they're not doing the work that they're being refreshed for. And the other one is, they do this long enough, the Lord may allow persecution to arise, like he did with the people in Acts through Saul, to get them to do the work they were being refreshed to do. So now the day we're going to pick up, we're going to pick up we're going to pick up kind of where we left off. And remember, he's the written commandments have not been given yet. They've only heard the spoken commandments. All right, so we sort of pick up where we left off in Exodus 24, verse 15 through 18. And Moses went into the mount, and the cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And in the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire in the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went up into the midst of the cloud and gathered him into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so what we find here with Moses is, as we mentioned, notice he goes up on the seventh day, speaks of refreshing, like the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, and that's to refresh us, and so we can do the work. But notice that's when he was called up. So he's up there 6 whole days before he's ever called up. Okay. Now, after he's called up, he's in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And that's perhaps counting. That may or may not be that clock may have ticked. 40 days may have started when he went up originally, or maybe when he was called up in the midst of the cloud. Okay. Because notice he got up into the mount, so he went up part of the way, but now he went further into the cloud. Okay. He was below the cloud. Now he's in the cloud. And if you remember from last week, Joshua, Aaron and Hur, he left them in charge. They were the ones that upheld his arms. We talked about the war with Amalek. We got tired. Amalek would start prevailing when the staff came down. So they upheld his arms. He's left him in charge, and Joshua is his aide who's went up there with him. So now he's up there 40 days and 40 nights. So assuming that means the clock starts on Pentecost. Pentecost normally starts around the middle of right around the 1st of June on our calendar. So he's not coming back down until, if that's the case, until mid-July. And if the 40 days started when he initially went up before he went into the cloud, then it would be the first part of July. So either way, he's gone a significant amount of time. Now, notice we're going all the way to Exodus 31. and and we'll explain that in a moment here. But in Exodus 31, verse 16 through 18, we read the following. Wherefore the children shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath through all the generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and the seventh day rested and was refreshed. And he gave unto Moses, for he had made an end of communing with him upon the mount, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. Okay, so at the end of this 40-day period, that's when the tablet's actually written on. And notice the last thing God reminds Moses of before he hands him the written tablet, the written commandments, about the Sabbath being a sign between Israel and the Lord. And we'll discuss that some more as we go along. Now we go to Deuteronomy 5, verse 28 through 31, where Moses is rehearsing this. We find out a little more information here about what's going on the mount. And the Lord heard your words, and you spake to me. And the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of the voice of this people, which they have spoken to you, and well they have said to you that they have spoken. Oh, there was such a heart, and they would fear me and keep all my commandments always. That might be well with them and with their children forever. Saying to them, get you into your tents again. But as for you, stand here with me, stand you here by me. I'll speak to all the commandments and statutes which I shall teach them, and they shall do them in the land which I give them to possess it. Okay, so this is why. I mean, notice all of chapters 25 through 30 through 30, and most of 31 were just commandments God gave. And the commandments, I'm sure we'll get into some of them in a later lesson, but they mostly concern 3 things: the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle, and the priesthood. And while the ark, those things are going to be with them in the wilderness, the main focus is when they get in the land, how they conduct themselves and what they're to do when they're in the land according to the will of God. So this is what they're talking about before God. This is what they're talking about all those 6, virtually all of 7 chapters, except for like we saw 1 verse at the end. That reminder about the Sabbath. Now we're getting the particulars of what's written down on that tablet. And he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments. He wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And Lord commanded me that time to teach you your statutes and judgments, that you might do them in the land wherever you go to possess. I'm a little remiss here. I forgot this important point here about not having a heart in them. The people were, of course, to wait for Moses, but God knows their heart's not right, and they don't have a heart to obey him anyways. So now we see again, he's gone up there, he's got there to get those statutes and commandments we talked about in the land, but core to those is the 10 commandments. If they're not keeping the 10, the rest don't matter. So, so again, he went up there to get commandments, so they know what to do once they got in the land, in the promised land God's promised to take them to, how to conduct themselves. But the core of it's the 10 commandments. And in Deuteronomy 5:22, where he's rehearsed this matter, this is what he says to them. These words the Lord spoke out of your assembly and unto all your assembly out of the midst of the fire, of the cloud, and of the thick darkness. With a great voice, they added no more. He wrote them in 2 tables of stone and delivered them unto me. And what did he speak? What did he speak and added no more to? The 10 commandments. Remember, we got down to number 10, thou shalt not covet. They said, make it stop. So this is why he's written them. He's had those same ones they heard his voice written. He wrote those himself on these 2 tablets of stones, and then gave Moses the 2 tablets of stone. And Deuteronomy 9, verses 9 through 11, Moses gives a little more insight to what's going on here with the written commandments, about his receiving the written commandments. And here's what we read. And when I was gone up into the mount to receive the tables of stone, even the tables of the covenant which the Lord made with you, and I abode in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. Neither did I eat bread or drink water. And the Lord delivered me the 2 tables of stone written with the finger of God. And on them was written according to all the words of the Lord spoken to you in the mount in the midst of the fire of the day of the assembly. And it came to pass at 40 nights and 40 days that the Lord gave me 2 tables of stone, even the tables of the covenant. Okay, so all it's written on them. There's the finger of God, God himself to the writing. He did this. And he writ them according to the words as the Lord spoke to them. He's writing on the tablets the same things that they heard him speak. Remember, he wanted to hear him speak to Moses, so they believed Moses forever. So they believed that Moses really didn't hear from God, and Moses just wasn't going off and coming back with stuff and just saying, oh yeah, God told me such and such. They themselves, it was a testimony to them that Moses really, that God really was the author. Moses was just the mediator. As we talked about when we talked about the spirit, the heart, and the mediator. So notice this thing here. He abode in Mount 40 days, nights, and he neither ate bread or drank water. I'll talk some more about this in a future lesson, but what's it remind us of? Reminds us of Messiah going to be tempted in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights, and he also did not eat bread or drink water. And this is not a natural fast, it's supernatural. The average person it takes about 60 days from not eating to starve to death. But water, it takes only about 3 days of no water, and the average person will die from a lack of will die from dehydration. He can't go 40 days. God himself sustained Moses. And again, we'll talk about this in more detail, but I just want you to note that. I just want you to take note of that at this time, that while he's up there, he doesn't eat or drink. God himself sustained him. He's in the presence of God, and he just doesn't need food and drink. So he's got those 2 tablets, and the only thing is written on them in all those 7 chapters of commandments we didn't look at, or the previous 3 chapters that God talked to Moses between when they heard the voice of God, between that and when Moses went up to the mount to get more. Just the 10 commandments, because again, if you don't keep those, the others don't matter. And remember, 6 of them are about showing love to people the right way, and that's the 6 the people that they really had the issue with. I mean, the covenant's just about the heart, and that's when they said make it stop, because their heart's not right. And that's going to come out here in Exodus 32, 1 through 5. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down on the mount, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said unto him, make us gods which go out, which shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what has become of him. And Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings that are in the ears of your wives and of your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. The people broke off the gold earrings to their ears and brought them to Aaron. They received them with their hand and fastened it with a graving tool. And after it made a molten, and after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, these be your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And Aaron saw it. He built an altar for it. Aaron made a proclamation and said, For tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And that word is Yahweh. It's in Hebrew, Yahuwah, Yahweh, well, Jehovah, there's no J sound, but some people still say, however you like. Notice it's a feast of the Lord. And so Aaron's calling it a feast of the Lord, but what's it got here? It has an idol. And notice these things. Moses brought us out of the land of Egypt. We know what happened to him. Well, what's become of him? Moses delayed to come down the mount because, well, God was giving him a lot of instructions. And Moses undoubtedly had questions and wanted clarification, whatever, because he's got to teach these things, as we saw, to the people later. So they gathered him. So, Moses undoubtedly has, again, a lot of questions. Why if they do this? Why if they do that? What if this occurs? What if that occurs? That kind of thing. So to go before us. Now, they give Moses the credit for bringing them out of Egypt. So their eyes are not on God at all. They're on Moses they can see. And also noticing here, this gold and silver, where'd they get all this gold from in the first place? God remember that the Egyptians gave them jewels of gold. And notice this gold is not like often like gold, like we get where it's mixed with iron or something, make it harder. They break it off. It's in their earrings. And maybe it doesn't have a little clasp on the back where they can slide it off. They break it off because because pure gold is, if it's 100% pure, it's like silly putty. I mean, it's super soft. Okay. So it's a pretty well refined gold here. They're able to break it off. So the prosperity that God gave them, they're now using to make this idol. And notice what they say about this idol, that they gave Aaron the gold, and he had made it into a molten calf, then fashioned with a graving tool. Okay. So he's actually responsible for making the thing. But what do they say about it? These be your gods, O Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. They're giving this golden calf, and those gods, plural. We'll talk about why plural in a minute. And now, so this is plainly associated with an idol or idols. And yet they're going to have a feast unto the Lord with these practices of idolatry associated with this idol they just made. And we'll look at those practices here in a moment. They rose up in the morning and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go get you down, for your people, which you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. And they have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. And they have made a molten calf, have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone now, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and I may consume them, and I'll make of you a great nation. Okay, God has had it with him. This is not the first incident. In fact, we'll look at when the first incident was. Okay, it's not the first time they've done something like this. And he's showing them his signs and wonders. He's done all this for them, but their eyes were never on him anyway. They're on Moses. And notice, like parents, a child does wrong. One of the parents say to the other one, you know what your son did or your daughter did to the other parent? Well, the same thing's going on here. Your people, which you brought out of the land of Egypt, which is what they themselves had said. Again, focused on, and Moses did lead them, but God's the one who did all the heavy lifting. They've corrupted themselves, but now God is just owning them. And not just owning them, he says it's a stiff-necked people. Well, we saw before this ever occurred where he said that they don't have a heart to obey him. That's why they're stiff-necked. As we discussed with the spirit, the heart, and the mediator, that's why the heart has to be replaced. It cannot obey God's commandments. The human heart, that's why we must be born again, given a new heart. Well, it hasn't happened to these people. And God's ready to just wipe them off the face of the earth and start over with Moses. Because this golden calf. Now we're going to look ahead, and we're going to see this golden calf appears once again, almost 1,000 years later. Here's what we read in 1 Kings 12, 28 through 30. Whereupon the king took counsel, made 2 calves of gold, and said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Israel. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. He set one in Bethel, and the other put in Dan. And the thing became a sin, but the people were to worship before the one, even the Dan. Okay, Bethel means the house of God, and Dan means judge. Okay. And one was in the northern end of his kingdom, others the southern. This is right after the division of the two kingdom of the United Kingdom of Israel. Solomon dies. His son, not long afterwards, Jeroboam's ruling the northern kingdom. Rehoboam's ruling the southern kingdom. And the king here, Jeroboam, whom God promised to make as sure as the house of David, really doesn't believe the Lord is concerned about them going down and worshiping in Jerusalem. So he sets them up what? 2 golden calves, one in each location. And the one in Bethel's people don't go to so much, but the one in Dan, the north, perhaps because of the time of year when they go visit and everything, the location perhaps is very, very pleasant or whatever, gets a lot more people up there. Dan being a city, not being the tribal lands of the tribe of Dan, formerly called Lachish. So the golden calves are still there, are still appearing 1,000 years later, which brings to the question, why golden calves? Why calves of gold? Where do they get such an ideal? Why 1,000 years later, it's still there? Our answer's here in Ezekiel chapter 20. In verse 7 through 8, we read the following. And I said to him, cast you away every man the abomination of his eyes, and defile not yourselves with idols, the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God, but they rebelled against me, and they hearkened not unto me. They did not every man cast away the abomination of his eyes, neither did they forsake the idols of Egypt. And I said, I'll pour my fury upon them, accomplish my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. Okay. So notice in the midst, God was ready to wipe them out in Egypt. Forever took them out. He had already sent Moses to speak to him, and they cried out to him. He said, they already got this is in Exodus, but here it is in Ezekiel. They had already agreed to make him their God and have no other gods beside him. And they broke it in Egypt. And if you remember, we talked about this. At a certain point, at a certain point after Joseph and his brothers died, they left the land of Goshen, where all the worshipers of God were packed together, and they went out to the cities of the Egyptians, and lived among the Egyptians, and they started worshiping the gods of the Egyptians. And this golden calf is one of those gods. Apis is what the Egyptians called it. But notice that idol of Egypt. And now in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 18, a little further down, he's talking to their children, the children of those who left Egypt. And I said to their children in the wilderness, walking on the statutes of your fathers, and you observe their judgment, or defile yourself with their idols. Okay, what idol they defile themselves with in the wilderness? The golden calf. And again, it's from Egypt. And we can definitely be certain of this because of the words of Stephen in Acts chapter 7, verse 39 through 41. To whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust from them, and their hearts turned back to Egypt, saying unto Aaron, make us gods to go before us. That's as Moses brought us out of the land of Egypt. We know not what's become of him. And they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifice unto the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Okay, their hearts were turned back to Egypt. They didn't want to obey Moses. So since their hearts are, and that's the problem, they don't have a heart to obey God. They're stiff and rebellious. They're stiff-necked and rebellious. And their hearts are back. God has taken them out of Egypt, but Egypt's not out of them. They long for the things. They long for a lot of the things of Egypt. We saw before they longed for the food of Egypt. Well, now they also long for the gods of Egypt, the idol worship of Egypt, and what that idol worship involves. And we'll look at that in detail in a moment. But so they want the blessing of God, but they don't want God himself. They don't want to know God, but the only way you can know God, which is keeping his commandments. They wanted God to deliver them from their slavery. That's it. They want to walk in his ways. And unfortunately, I've seen this happen too many times in too many congregations I've been to, where they meet on the Sabbath or on a different day. That the people want God. They're like, God deliver me from such, but they don't want to follow God. They don't want to follow Jesus. They want Jesus to give them benefits, but they don't want to follow him. They don't love Jesus because Jesus said, if you love me, you obey my commandments in John chapter 14. And they certainly don't want to obey his commandments. They just want the benefits and the deliverance. And that's what's gone on here. But their hearts are still back with the world. It's like these people's hearts were still back in Egypt and with the gods of Egypt and with the worship of those gods. We're going to look at that in detail here. How do they worship this God? Well, we'll see here in a moment here. In Ezekiel 32, actually, we already saw this here. The people rose up to play, drank. They feasted, got drunk, and when it says play there, it's talking about sexual. It's talking about sexual. It's talking about having fornication. We'll see that more plain here in a minute, okay? But this is, remember, they're doing this unto the Lord. They're worshiping God with the practice of idolatry. So now we've seen God's ready to wipe them out because of this. And now we're going to look at Moses, the intermediary, stepping in. Moses besought the Lord his God and said, Lord, why do you wax hot against why does your wrath wax hot against your people, which you brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power of the mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, For mischief he did bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them off on the face of the earth. Turn from your fierce wrath and repent of this evil against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, whom you swear by your own self, and said to them, I'll multiply your seeds as the stars of heaven, and all this land I've spoken of, I'll give to your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. The Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do to his people. Okay, well, now notice, now they're your people to God. Remember, he's reminding that you brought them forth out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand. Moses followed the instructions of God. God did all the heavy lifting. Moses could not have done it on his own. He could have done this without God, but God could have certainly done without Moses. He's going to just pick someone else or whatever. But God did all the heavy lifting, and Moses reminding him of that. And also, he reminds him of making his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. He made covenants with them. They weren't unconditional, as we showed. We still are saying the patriarchs. They had conditions. Abraham, Isaac, and Israel kept their end of the deal. They met the conditions of the covenant. And therefore, God is obligated to meet his as well. And notice that that land is given to Israel, specifically mentioned here. The two parts here, notice. One with the land, in front of the sands of the seashore, earthly. One, the stars of heaven. And they're going to inherit that land. They're going to inherit that land. But notice the other thing that Moses does. He didn't lead off with that one. I mean, that's a good one. And the words Jacob said concerning his 12 sons couldn't come to pass if God wiped all them out. Now, the part about multiplying seeds certainly could have came through Moses. You're going to cause Moses to live a lot longer, have a lot of children, and so on and so forth. But notice, so Moses didn't start with that argument. Look at the way he starts with. What are the Egyptians going to say? The Egyptians are going to say you're untrustworthy. That basically, oh yeah, you can take people out, but you can take them out of them, but you can't take them in. It's what you promised. And and no one can trust you. You're not faithful. Is what the Egyptians are going to basically be saying. It was all a trick. They want to kill him in Egypt, so he brought him out into the mountains. He brought him out there to consume him out there instead. So Moses' plea for God to turn his wrath is what will the Egyptians think? Now, we continue on here in Ezekiel 20, verse 9, and we see the following. For I wrought for my name's sake, that she not be polluted before the heathen, among whom they were, and whose I made myself known to them, and bring them forth out of the land of Egypt. Okay, notice, remember, he was ready to wipe Israel out in Egypt before he ever delivered them through the 10 plagues. And because they were already worshiping idols in Egypt there. It wasn't just they'd worshiped before Moses it wasn't just they worshiped before found idolatry, they continued to do it. Hence the 10 Commandments starts off with not having other gods, But why not do it? Because before the heathen, which is a goy is the Hebrew word. It can just mean Gentiles. Remember, there's a mixed multitude in Egypt. It's not just Egyptians. There's also the Gentiles. So God didn't do it because he's concerned about about his name not being polluted. The Gentiles not thinking badly of his name. He's very concerned about the Gentiles. Think about his reputation with the Gentiles. Now, Ezekiel 20 verses 10 through 14 gets us to where we are currently, and we see this pattern repeating. Wherefore I caused them to go forth out of the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. And I gave my statutes, showed them my judgments, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that might know I am the Lord that sanctify them. For the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They walked not my statutes. They despised my judgments, which if a man shall do, he shall even live in them. In my Sabbaths they have greatly polluted. Then I said, I would pour out my fury on them in the wilderness to consume them. But I wrought for my name's sake that it should not be polluted before the heathen, in whom sight I brought them out. Okay, so, here we are, consumed them in the wilderness. This is, where we're at today, where we're at right now. He's already gave them statutes. He gave them statutes and showed them his judgments. Gave them the 10 Commandments in particular. That Sabbath's a sign between them. He set them apart. That's what sanctify means. So apart from all other ethnic groups, it's a sign that they are set apart from other ethnic groups, and a special people to him. And of course, if the whole world's keeping the Sabbath, it's not a sign, of being set apart. So Israel's keeping the Sabbath, and no one else is commanded to do this because it set them apart. Even though God began this even though in the beginning God started with this. And what they do? They totally despise his judgments. I mean, they're out here worshiping idols, fornicating, getting drunk, worshiping all in his name, a festival to him, a festival to the Lord. They're worshiping the Lord with a practice of worshiping idolatry and actually have an idol set up as well. But he withheld himself from destroying them off the face of the earth. So that means by a rot. He controlled. He held back his hand from doing so for his name's sake, because he didn't want to pollute it before the heathen, in whom sight I brought them out. Notice here it's the heathen sight, but earlier it was their own sight he brought them out. Now it's the heathen, the Gentiles. And remember, this went all over a wide range. I mean, anthropologists had found that people 3,000-4,000 miles away don't know all this stuff, but they've heard of this people that were brought out of Egypt. It's been passed down orally in their oral history. And so they don't know. So they don't know this. Now, why is God so concerned about this? Well, what was this? Well, remember, he really made 2 covenants with Abraham. The first was concerning the seed, and what was it? The second was about the land. And what did it say? In your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Because the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants are not the end themselves. They're a means to an end. It's about saving the human race. All the families of the earth will be blessed. There is no other name. There is no other God they can call upon to be saved and to be blessed. And if that name's polluted, they're not going to call upon it. If they think God's just out there to do mischief, you can't trust him. He gives you commandments, and he's just giving them to bring trouble upon you. People aren't going to want to turn to him. Jewish people go on and on about, we're the chosen people. But they never ask themselves the question, chosen to do what? They're chosen to make the ways of God known, to save his instrument to save the human race. And his instrument they are, whether they want to be or not. And so this is why you have so many actors and producers and script writers and those kind of things disproportionately are Jewish. I mean, but the problem is those gifts were given to tell a story, the only story worth telling, the story of God's love for the human race. But they've misused those gifts. I mean, Star Wars is a classic example. Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, all of Jewish descent. Harrison Ford was a is Jewish on his mother's side, 1/4 Jewish. Which, by the way, I called in an online game called Jew or No Jew, and they dinged me for picking Harrison Ford, but turns out I was correct. So Harrison Ford, I mean, but those are examples. Steven Spielberg, who goes on to produce those movies. And what's the problem with them? Well, they're all promoting pantheism. Just kind of was part of the religion of the Druids. Okay, all is God. There's this force, and it's neither good nor evil. It's impersonal. It's another religion. It's steeped in idolatry. It comes from idolatry. And why God give him these talents for? To tell his story. I mean, they're effective storytellers. You know, that's why Tom Hanks, oh gosh, I space his name. Tom Cruise, except disproportionately, because they're made for this, but they're not telling the story they're made to tell. And you know, so God doesn't want his name. He wants the Gentiles to come seeking him, to seek his name, to seek after the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that requires they're obeying these statutes and commandments and keeping the Sabbath to keep themselves separate so everyone can identify them. But they won't have it. But nonetheless, he's got to protect his name among the Gentiles so he can save the Gentiles. So to save all the families of the earth. So he's held off. So he's holding off once again from destroying them off the face of the earth. Now we've heard God's side. We've heard God's side. He's told Moses what's going on, but Moses hadn't actually seen it yet. Well, let's see what happens as Moses comes down. As Moses comes down here with with the written commandments and sees what's going on. And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides. On the one side and the other, they were written. The tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraven upon the tables. Okay, notice these written commandments God Himself wrote. They're His they're His works. The tables are the works. He carved them out of the mountain. You know whatever He did, and then wrote the letters on them. Remember, it contained the 10 commandments. One side and the other. It might mean one. You know, he's got 2 tablets next to each other, as it plainly says. Half on one side, half on the other. Possibly could also mean on both sides, on front and back. Perhaps repeat it, but either way. And those are the testimony. The testimony of what? It's the same words God spoke. A testimony that Moses really does hear from God. The same words that he spoke, so they would believe Moses really heard from God, were written on these tablets. The testimony that Moses, to remind him, oh yeah, we heard God Himself speak those words. Now, so continue on, Josh, in Exodus 20 and 32, verse 7 through 17 through 20, read the following. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp. And he said, it's not the war of them that shout for mastery, neither is it for the voice and the cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing I do hear. And it came to pass, he came nigh to the camp, he saw the camp and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast tables out of his hand and brake them beneath the mount. And he took the calf which they had made and burnt it with fire and ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, strawed it upon the water, and made the children of Israel drink of it. Okay, so Josh remembers his aide has went up there and he's been hanging out. Now we don't know if he brought some food with him or what. But Yahshua, same as Jesus, Hebrew name, Yahshua's been up there with him. And he thinks it's war, because remember, he's the one that led the actual fighting against Amalek, okay? Perhaps, it's just kind of wars on his mind all the time. But Moses says it's not them shouting because they're winning victory or shouting because they're being overcome, but it's singing. So notice there's literal singing and dancing here. So he sees the calf, they're singing and dancing, probably around the calf itself. And now Moses is feeling that anger. God, I mean, he was cool as long as he wasn't seeing it. And God could see it, of course, was angry. Now Moses has got that same anger. And notice he throws down the 10 Commandments and they break beneath the mount. Whoops. Well, that's, but they're broken. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a future lesson in more detail. And notice how angry is he? He took this calf, he burnt it in the fire. He burned it in the fire, he ground it to powder, and he strewed it. He puts it in the water and makes people drink it. Well, here's the thing: it's gold, and your body cannot get rid of heavy metals. That's why mercury poisoning and silver poisoning, which turns your skin blue, happen because they accumulate in your body and you just can't get rid of them. That's why they used to put mercury in shots as a preservative. They quit doing it because your body it just accumulates in your body and causes problems. Well, this is likely, this could possibly cause health issues for everyone, for all these people in Israel, all the people of Israel. He's making them drink. And of course, when he's making drink are the ones right down there where he's at. We'll see in a moment. It's not quite all the people, but it's most of them. Let's continue. So Moses seeing people singing and dancing, and he is ticked off, to say the least. Now he's still angry, and he goes to talk to Aaron. Remember, he left Aaron and Hur in charge. And what's he say to him? Well, this we read here in Exodus 32, 21 through 25. And that Moses and Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. You know the people, that they are set on mischief. They said to me, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what has become of him. They said to them, and he said to them, whosoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, I cast in the fire, and there came out this calf. Then Moses saw the people naked, for Aaron made him naked to the shame of under their shame among their enemies. Okay, so first of all, notice Moses, because he suspects the people did something to Aaron. Aaron's kind of wimpy, as we've seen before. Elegant speaker, but kind of wimpy. And so he, right away he suspects. Remember, God himself, the people were rebellious, stiff-necked, and Aaron reminds him of this in his answer. The people are set on mischief. Now, Moses, remember, they wanted to kill Moses at one point because they thought they didn't have any water. They were ready to do Moses in. So he's reminding Moses, without saying the incident particularly, of that kind of thing. They're set on mischief. Aaron was afraid the people were going to kill him. Aaron here is acting as priest. He's acting as priest here. And they've been kind of doing that role the whole time. He spoke God would speak to Moses. Moses would speak to Aaron. Aaron would speak to the people. So Aaron was also a mediator in that regard. But they wanted to kill Moses. Why would they want to kill him? So, he just did this to appease them because he was afraid. So they demanded that they make these gods they worship in Egypt. So now this thing here is a little humorous and kind of pathetic. I cast it in the fire, the gold, and there came out this calf, leaving out the part about the fact that he molded the calf and engraved it. Okay. It's kind of like Shazam. This calf just came out of the fire. He's leaving out details, trying to make himself look in the best light. and he's really playing on the pressure the people put on him, which was genuine. And Moses knows that. I mean, notice even Moses' accusation started about, what did this people do unto you? They did something that you brought this great sin upon them. And lastly, notice the people are naked. As I mentioned, that play was a reference to fornication, to sexual sin. And why is it shame among their enemies? Well, their enemies see them, first of all, like Hamas did, with a lot of the women on October 7th, stripped them, raped them, etc. But also, a naked enemy is powerless. If they're all naked out there doing this, and their enemy showed up, they can run down on them before they get their swords or anything else. And so this nakedness, should be hidden inside the tent, husband and wife, but it's out in the open for everyone to see. Now we're going to look at Moses' response to Aaron's words. And here in Exodus 32, verse 26 through 20, I read the following. Then Moses stood up at the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." And all the sons of Levites gathered themselves unto him. He said unto them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, every man his neighbor." And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell that day about 3,000 men. And Moses said, "Consecrate yourselves today for to the Lord, even every man upon his son, upon his brother, and may bestow upon you a blessing this day." Okay, so notice he stood in the gate of the camp and asked who was on the Lord's side. And only one group shows up. Men from the sons of Levi, the tribes of it says all here, but that's a little bit inaccurate. But all the people who showed up were from the tribes of Levi is the ideal, okay? Most of the Levites show up, and I'll show you why I say most in a minute here. And only the Levites show up. Invitations to everyone. What's their commandment? What's the commandment of God? And that's to kill everyone. And notice this: family, friend, neighbor. And who are they going to kill? The ones that are naked. Okay? They're naked. They're defenseless. To the shame of the enemy, to the shames of the enemies of Israel. Well, don't have to worry about that because the children of Levi are going to certainly know who to kill. Because again, not everyone's involved. The Levites are plainly dressed here. Plainly aren't involved at this point. And so, it's the people that were naked that are being killed. And there's about 3,000 of them at this particular point throughout the camp. And then after they did that, he tells them to consecrate themselves. They're going to be set apart. They're going to be consecrated. They're going to have to be consecrated in some manner. It's set apart to the Lord because he's going to bestow a blessing upon them. And now we're looking at what that blessing is. We're going to jump ahead that they get for obeying God's commandment to kill all those that were naked throughout the camp, who were naked in this idol worship. And while we read here in Numbers 3, verse 11 to 13, the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, "Behold, I've taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of all the firstborn to open the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, and all the firstborn are mine. For the day I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn of Israel, both man and beast, mine they shall be. I am the Lord." Okay, now, first of all, so instead, the blessing that's going upon the Levites was originally going on all the firstborn of every man. Okay, of every man. And he hollowed them. He set them apart for a holy purpose. But now that holy purpose is not going to go to them, it's going to go to the Levites instead. And remember, the firstborn also has also is it's theirs to lose, the birthright and the blessing. The birthright is going to go to Judah. We've seen this before, okay? But the blessing among Jacob's tribes went to well the blessing went to Ephraim. The blessing so the birthright went to Manasseh, who got a double portion on each side. But inside of each family, there's that birthright, and that birthright included this being hallowed to the Lord. No more. That part's gone, and that blessing of being in charge, that blessing of being hallowed to the Lord, is gone from the firstborn and given to the Levites instead. And also, to some regard, is also the birthright. You'll see what I mean here in a minute. In Deuteronomy 33, verses 8 through 10, we read the following. This is Moses speaking of the tribes of Israel in his long speech before he dies. Of Levi said, "Let your Thummim and your Urim be with your Holy One, whom you approve at Massah, and with whom you did strive at the waters in Meribah, who said unto his father and mother, I've not seen him, there to acknowledge his brothers, nor knew his own children. For they observed my word and kept my covenant. They shall teach Jacob your judgments and Israel your law. They shall put incense for you in the whole burnt sacrifice upon your altar." Okay, their Holy One, whom they did prove was of course Messiah. But the Urim and Thummim are associated with a high priest. We'll learn about that future lesson in more detail. And the priests have the incense of the burnt, particularly the incense. Okay, the incense that goes in the holy place. Only the priest can go. But these are all from the tribe of Levi. In the burnt offering, they can go to the area of the altering. All the Levites can. And the thing is, they collect tithes. And when you do the math, you find that they're going to have, on average, twice as much money as the average person in other tribes. So in that sense, they got the birthright as well. Because the thing about having a double portion of, if it's land and all the land's equal, if you have twice as much land, you're going to be able to make you're not going to be able to bring twice as much money in from the land. So the income part of the double of the birthright, the income aspect's theirs as well. And why? And remember, the main jobs of the priests and the Levites to teach Jacob his judgments. Why do they do this? Because they observed his word and kept their covenant. How they do that? They didn't. Notice they did not spare their own mother, their own father, their own siblings, and their own children. Whoever they came across that was naked that day, had made themselves naked to the shame of Israel and its enemies. In this worship of the golden calf, that day when Moses brought down the written commandments, they killed them. And see, this is the way it's always been. End of the day, we all have the same test. The test Adam failed, they passed, and previous to them, Abraham passed. Adam's test was when Eve offered him the fruit. He could please God by obeying his commandment and rejecting the fruit that would displease Eve, or he could please Eve, his flesh and blood, flesh of his flesh, bone of his bone, and eat the fruit and displease God. And when it came between his flesh and blood, his flesh and bone, as he put it in his case, his own flesh and blood and God, he chose his flesh and blood. But Abraham in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, chose pleasing God over his own son. And in the same manner, they chose obeying the commandments of God over their own parents, their own siblings, their own children. Doesn't mean they enjoyed killing these people, but they made their that was a choice they were forced upon them, and they chose God instead. For that reason, they are now they're put in this position to teach others, because God expects those who teach to do what they to teach others to do what they teach. They've kept his covenant, so now they're going to teach it. And by the way, the penalty been laid out. That the penalty for idol worship was death. So the people knew this going in before they took their clothes off and whatever. Okay, now we're gonna wrap up this incident with the golden calf that happens when Moses brought down the written commandments. And here's what we see in Exodus 32, verses 30 through 35. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin. Now I will go up to the Lord, peradventure I'll make an atonement for your sin." And Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh, this people have sinned a great sin and have made them gods of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray, out of your book which you have written." And the Lord said to Moses, "Whosoever has sinned against me, him I'll blot out of my book. Therefore go, lead the people in the place which I've spoken unto you. Behold, my angel shall go before you, and nonetheless, in the day of my visit, I'll visit their sin upon them. And the Lord plagued the people because they made the calf which Aaron made." Okay, so notice Moses the mediator, mediating for them. He acknowledges they've made a great sin. They've made this great sin, and these gods of gold. Again, what's that speak of prosperity? And just like today, people who say they're lovers of God, worshipers of God, have made gods of prosperity. And their focus is not on the giver, but on the gift. They're not seeking the face of God to do his will, but the hand of God. Why? So they can consume it on their own desires. This gold God gave them was for his purposes. Part of that commission he gave them, that commission he gave them, so his name would be known throughout the earth and so on, for the salvation of the human race. But they have made gods of gold, and so have many today, particularly so-called prosperity preachers. And the dumb thing about it is kind of like in this story here we've seen. Where did Aaron get all the gold for this calf they were worshiping? This calf that promised them prosperity? From the people themselves. But the people wanted to believe it. They gave money to this. They gave money to this gift. This thing then looked for it to give them money. And then people do this. They say, wow, this prosperity teacher, he has millions of dollars. If I give him my money, he'll show me to have millions of dollars. We got millions of dollars from people like you giving him his money. And they couldn't see it. Today, a lot of people can't see it either. Because why? Their heart wasn't right. It's always been about the heart. They're not focused on getting prosperity for the purpose of God. They're getting it to consume on their own lust. I can get this thing. I can get that thing. I can go there. I can go here. So on and so forth. It's all me. Why I can spend it on me for. That's where their heart's at. Their heart's not in obeying God, and neither were these people. So Moses, now notice the book of life here. First time it's mentioned. Well, Moses, we'll go into that more detail. Saul a bunch of stuff up on the mount, that was in heaven. God showed it, gave him a vision of heaven, and saw, opened a door, a portal, or whatever it was. But anyway, he could see stuff in heaven. And among was this mount. This book, the first time it's ever mentioned. And I want you to notice something about this book here. There's no mention of people's names being written into it, only blotted out. The reason in the great white throne judgment why he looks in there to see whose name's written in it, it's really the names that weren't blotted out. God's for us and not against us from the day we were conceived. Our name was already put in there. He wants us to have life, but sin causes our name to be blotted out. But fortunately, we have an intermediary as well who took our sin for us, so our name wasn't blotted out. So our sin was forgiven. And of course, that's Messiah, Yeshua. And notice he's going to visit their sin upon them. He's not going to let them get by scot-free on this business. He's just not wiping them off the face of the earth today. And the show he means business, he plagues the people. Because even though Aaron physically made it, they made the calf. Aaron, again, having reasonable concern they would kill him, did this to appease the people. But the people are at fault primarily. Now, there's one more thing we need to look at about the Levites here. We need to understand the ties to this incident. And here's what we see in Numbers 26, verse 12, verse 62. And those that were numbered of them were 20 and 3,000, all males from a month old and upward. But they were not numbered among the children of Israel because there was no inheritance given them among the children of Israel. Okay, no inheritance, meaning their inheritance was the Lord himself. They got cities, but they didn't get any land. So all their tribes, they numbered the people in the tribes so then they could divide the land, give everyone an equal size allotment, so on and so forth. Okay. Inside that tribe. All right. So that know how much land each person got. Did he do that with all they have is cities. They don't have land. So, so there's no reason to do it for that reason, but their number nonetheless, and that for a different reason. And that number is 20 and 3,000. And that's significant because we're showed significance here in 1 Corinthians 10, I'm sorry, verses 5 and 8, our closing passage. As with many of them, God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things were examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they lusted. Neither be you idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. People sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. Your less commit fornication, some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. And we're going to start with that. Notice they fell in one day. The plague, God plagued. First, the Levites killed about 3,000, we're told. It doesn't specify how many were killed by God in the plague. Well, here we can do the math. About 20,000 were killed in the plague. It's 23,000. And remember, and if you look at these numbers at the end of the Numbers, this is when they left the wilderness, right before they left the wilderness to go in the promised land. They're very precise. It's 23,000 is not a close estimate, okay? It'll say in 14 or whatever of some tribe or whatever the case was, okay? So there's 23,000 of them. All right. And how many died was 23,000. They didn't just replace the firstborn among the firstborn in the things pertaining to the tabernacle. They also this is really their children here. They replaced their children, the 23,000, replaced the 23,000 who died at Sinai with the golden calf. And that's a warning to us that overthrones King James were destroyed. Okay. Why were they destroyed in the wilderness? These 23,000. God wasn't pleased with them. Why not? Well, because they were idolatry and committing fornication. Again, notice Rose at the Play talks about reference to fornication, which tells us something about sex. It's supposed to be play, not there's supposed to be a play element to it, not just some duty performed with the least amount of joy possible. Okay, it's supposed to, it's got more than one reason. Reproduction's not the only one. It's supposed to refresh us as well, and so on and so forth. So they were doing that. The problem is they're not doing it with their wife. They're committing fornication when they're not married to, and they're doing it in connection with idolatry. And what's driving all this? Lusting after evil things, as they also lusted. They lusted after people that were not their spouse for sex. They lusted after idols. And remember, that idol they lusted is an idol of gold, an idol of prosperity. They lusted after prosperity. Now, wanting God to give you money that you can carry out his will is not lusting after prosperity. Wanting money so you can ask amiss and heap it on for your own desires makes it an idol. And that makes it an evil thing. Again, the problem is not the money ever. It's why you want the money. And particularly in their case, there's something contrary to the will of God. So let us remember this warning, and that God showed he meant business. And because the most common, I showed this before. This teaching that people can get the benefits of God, including salvation, without obeying the commandments of God, is called a damnable heresy in the Word of God. It's a heresy that leads to damnation. 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10 tell us plainly, those who do these things, and among them is listed fornication and idolatry, will not inherit the kingdom of God. Do not be deceived, is how it starts out. Anyone who tells you this is a deceiver. This is that message. This is part of that message we read about. We read about a couple of weeks ago, where about the end times, where all the people would go crazy, and what caused it? People were lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. They look religious, God, whatever. They may even talk it. May even be, against abortion, whatever, they have some form of godliness, but they deny the power. And that power is not just the miracle working power of the Holy Spirit being active today, that God is not cessation with it, but with the power of the Holy Ghost, more importantly, the power of the Holy Ghost to transform a life, to do what we showed through Scripture in the Spirit, the heart, and the mediator, to give us the power to obey God's commandments. And that Christ in us, the hope of glory, was doing the work. And it's not about us being strong enough. It's him being, there's no money being made in that message. So they deny the power, and they tell people, you're a sinner saved by grace. You got to continue to sin, except so on and so forth. Another way of denying the power. You're once saved, always saved. You can get the benefit without obeying the commandments. And this was written. Paul reminds us, the Apostle Paul reminds us of this incident with the golden calf when the written commandments were brought down. To note that God means business, and we cannot get the benefits, the blessings that come from God, including salvation, without loving God and obeying his commandments. That's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.